What's the worst, I hate to break it to you moment you had with someone? Not me, but my ex a couple years ago got a job as a cook working at a big hospital. They had a mostly set and recurring cycle of dishes or items and golden corral style stations around the cafeteria. Basic food dressed up or pre-prep, nothing too fancy. His first month, he became familiar with some of the residents and doctors who would make small talk and shoot the crap with them as they loaded up their plates. One of these doctors was a man originally from India who was very enthusiastic about the country fried chicken smothered in pepper gravy. He said it was his favorite dish out of anything else there, and it wasn't uncommon for him to stop by at the end of his shift to purchase extra to take home. My partner's first time working the entree station, the doctor pointed and asked my partner for his usual country fried chicken. My partner stared at him confused. They didn't serve country fried chicken, but they do have chicken fried steak. When he nonchalantly informed the doctor of this, the man's eyes went wide. He looked genuinely shocked. "This isn't chicken?" My partner described the expression on his face as going from jarred and baffled to so sad when he realized he had been eating beef this entire time, but also that it had tasted so delicious. Apparently, despite eating other types of meat, the man was still deeply tied to his Hindu roots and avoided beef in his regular diet because of this. The previous cook before him had mistaken these ambiguous meat patties smothered in thick gravy for chicken, so wires got crossed and he then relayed that incorrect information to the doctor. I still cringe when I think about this. My ex felt so sad he had to be the one to tell him. Oh, man, if there's one place I would expect to know what was being prepared in your food, it'd be a hospital, right? On the bright side, if they gave you something you're allergic to, at least you're close to the hospital. Story 2. Sister's a victim of her own impulsivity. She really likes new cars and will roll negative equity into a new car. Then she'll get bored of it, stop maintaining it, trade it in for a loss, and have an even bigger loan. And this was back when loans were pretty much free and they could finance anybody. So she called me up all excited because she found a new truck, got approved for financing, and was on the way to go buy it. So I went to meet her there, a big V8 full-size pickup truck. For a woman working part-time and living in a congested city. Why do you want this? Well, my kids need a place to transport their bikes and I want to go camping. So I test drove it with her. The salesman was doing everything in his power to make the sale, and fair enough, he's not a financial advisor. He doesn't need to deal with the fallout. But right there in the showroom, I had to tell her that, look, this is an awful idea. You can't afford this. It's going to be a huge burden on you and you need to walk away. Thankfully, she did. Salesman would have hurt me if he could have gotten away with it. He was seething mad. Story 3. My superior, a bank VP, told me to fire my subordinate because, quote, he's always snapping his fingers when he walks and he knows it drives everybody crazy. She said if I don't do it, she'll fire both of us. This was decades ago. Laws were mere suggestions then. I took him to lunch and let him pick the restaurant. After eating, as we were pushing our empty plates to the center of the table, I just blurted out, "Ken, you're fired." "Yeah, I know. Is it about the snapping thing?" "Yeah, you knew this was coming?" "Yeah, I told them my lower pops for a few steps if I sit still for a while," he says. He gets up and walks around the table, and I can hear this loud pop, pop, pop. I told him, "I guess she doesn't believe you." He smiled and said it was okay. He'd already accepted an offer somewhere else, and he knew this was coming. A couple of years later, Ken's boss reached out and headhunted me, and Ken and I got to work together for a few years. Great guy, loud ankles. Story 4. Not me, but I was there for it. After a family wedding, my dad and some of his cousins he hadn't seen in years were at my parents' home drinking and catching up. As they were laughing about an old story from being kids, my dad asked one of the cousins how his little brother was doing, because they hadn't talked to me in a few years. The room got so silent instantaneously that we could tell something was very off. The cousin he asked about with the brother got breathless, and another cousin awkwardly told my dad that the brother had passed away the year prior. Turns out my entire family was aware and had all gone to the memorial and been notified. My grandma somehow failed to realize nobody had informed my parents, so it was literally only my family that had no clue. Nobody even really shared about it on social media, so it was just a complete shock to us. Story 5. 15 years ago, my friend's father sadly passed away shortly after we graduated college. It was devastating for him. He figured he'd at least get a nice money boost to help him get back on his feet, but unfortunately, his father kept it a secret that he was deep in debt and had no liquid cash to his name. My friend had no support and fell into a terrible depression. He was broke, he couch crashed with me, And now we're friends for a while. He quit his job and then he got comfortable with this new lifestyle. 2 years later, he's still spending a month here and there with various friends around the city, eating their food, occupying their couch, sipping off their cabinet, using the terrible, tragic passing of his father as his reasoning for being the way he is, or was. It had been 2 years. We understand the pain he felt was real, but it was really time for him to actually get back up on his feet and take care of himself. We didn't know how to explain it to him, but we all felt he was taking advantage of us and was using his father's passing as a sort of excuse to just not get a job. So I found him a job, a nice one he would be good at, he went to school for, and didn't need prior work experience. I talked to a team lead and an HR rep and got him a contact line for them, basically assuring an interview and a job offer if he arrived on time and sober. Weeks later, my HR rep and his team lead were confused, thinking I didn't relay the information to him. He never called. I gave him a layup of a job opportunity and he just ignored it outright. I called him out on it, but he told me to calm down and chill out and that I wasn't being sensitive to his depression and I wasn't understanding his needs. So my worst, I hate to break it to you moment, wasn't actually with him, it was with all my friends afterward. I had to tell them all to turn him down every time he asked to stay a week at their place. It was awful. The timing and my response to his refusal would give it away. This guy knew I was the horrible schmuck who turned all his friends against him and denied him free room and board. Hell, I was probably going to be the sole reason he'd blame for his inevitable descent into homelessness. I accepted the burden and called them up, explaining I had a job lined up for him and he refused, and we all got to stop giving him a free place to stay if he won't take an easy job. Yes, it was awful his dad passed away, and it's awful he didn't get any kind of inheritance to start his life properly. It's awful he felt this terrible depression that lingered for years, and most of all, it's awful he had a group of enabling friends like me who humored it for so long it became his accepted norm. We failed him. He didn't end up homeless, though, without us offering his jobless back a couch to crash on anymore. He ended up moving in with his aunt. Apparently, she didn't take his excuses, didn't put up with his laziness, and did all the things we should have been doing all along. No drinks allowed, no gaming after she went to bed. She only had one TV in the house, and it was for Food Network only. He got a job developing 3D assets for VR titles and started moving up and up, creating VR experiences for architecture companies. Dude still hates me probably, and I'll admit I made a mistake to justify it, but I'm really grateful his aunt was there. I did what I needed to do, but it would have been 10 times worse if he did end up living on the streets, still blaming his father's sudden passing for his 2-decade-long predicament. Story 6. Back around 2007, I had an older colleague who was excitedly flitting around the office telling everyone about some lottery she had won, and that she was going to quit as soon as the $100,000 cleared in her account. Mary was only in her 50s, so still years away from retirement. On top of that, she was an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, so we're not talking about a lucrative career where she was squirreling away funds for a rainy day. And here she was, ready to resign a decade early over a sum that would only be worth a few years of salary after taxes. Did I mention there was talk of a fur coat? I would have normally kept my mouth shut. After all, her poor financial planning was none of my business, and frankly, I would not have missed her in the office. I was not a fan. I just couldn't be silent once she got to my office, though. It was obviously a scam. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but are you absolutely sure this is legit? Oh yeah, I've already given them my bank information and everything. They're depositing the money today. You may want to call your bank just to be sure. No, it's fine. Okay, congrats. Dear reader, not even an hour later, I hear her screeching into her phone that, no, don't close my account. They're supposed to be depositing the money. Depositing. No, depositing. No, they're not taking it out. They're putting it in. My office mate and I just looked at each other in horror. Mary didn't say anything to anyone about the fraud. The bank calling her as a security measure saved her from getting cleaned out. The scammers didn't actually get her money. Epilogue, about a year later, a bunch of us, Mary and myself included, were laid off at the beginning of the recession. I didn't like Mary, but I didn't wish her ill. I could only imagine how much harder it was for her to find work than us 20 and 30-somethings who lost our jobs. I know the people laid off were cherry-picked based on who the founder didn't like. Question a process? Crappy list. Do anything other than cheerlead the founder's ideas? Crappy list. Run around the office talking about quitting. Mary absolutely landed on the crappy list that day. She had been one of the first employees the org ever hired, and just like that, she was disposable. Story 7. I live with a roommate and we got a new sublet of some guy they all knew. The guy's girlfriend of 5 years wanted to take a break. Everybody in the house said she had clearly wanted to dump him for a while. So the guy moved in and I became friends with him. He definitely thought they were getting back together, but he got depressed and drank a lot. One night he tells the housemates and I that he cheated on her a few times and even slept with his ex-GF on and off the first year they dated. Yikes. She, his new ex, was an absolute bombshell, could have easily been a model. The kind of face you could just stare at, unreal looking, but she was a total little princess. Real self-centered type, but a lot of fun to party with. She still hung around with the overall group of friends and my roommates. One night, everybody was drinking together when her ex wasn't around. Somebody brought up cheating and she started laughing. Someone was curious why she found it funny. Her. It's just not something I have to worry about. I'm too attractive. Nobody would cheat on me. Story 8. Had a guy working for me that was extremely nice, easy to get along with, and wildly inept. Not even like low effort, but just not capable of learning seemingly basic tasks. We tried everything, coaching, giving him legitimate checklist instructions, having a team lead sit with him for a couple weeks to walk him through basics, everything. Everyone said the same thing. He just couldn't do the job. Everything he did had to be double checked by somebody else, which meant that we might as well have somebody else do it. But everyone liked the guy. They thought he was easygoing and cool to be around, everything. But still, he just straight up couldn't do that job. So I had to find another place for him in the company that would be better matching his skills. The option would be for him to either take the lower job with lower pay, or he would be fired with severance. I was not looking forward to that conversation. I called him in for a one-on-one to break it to him, and the first thing he started with was, "Hey boss, before we start, I just want to tell you that I really feel like I've been doing a great job here and I would like to talk about a raise." Yeah, that conversation was not a fun one. Oof, that complete lack of self-awareness on his end makes it even worse somehow. Story 9. There was a rule at my job where only one of these two supervisors could be off at a time. One of them loved to take a full week off during holidays to get more bang for his PTO buck. One year, he had Thanksgiving week off, but the other supervisor had family come to town that week on late notice. The other supervisor asked him to cancel just one of his days so she could spend the day with family. He declined, even after she basically begged him, and he even said he didn't have anything to do that day. She then proceeded to take PTO days every Wednesday of a holiday week for the next calendar year, effectively blocking him from taking his cheap weeks off. He told me that he thought it was funny because he knew she didn't have enough time to take all those vacation days off, and she'd eventually have to cancel some of them. I got to tell him, I hate to break it to you, but she only took 2 hours off each of those days. You see, the rule didn't differentiate between a partial or whole day, so she only had to burn 24 or so hours to block him. He looked devastated. It was kind of petty on both of their parts, but I give her credit for being creative in her retribution, and I don't blame her a bit for what she did. Story 10. Having to tell a student who was almost totally blind that she likely couldn't be an ER nurse. She and her dad moved to our district, and at the IEP, her dad starts talking about how he can't wait for Sue to go to nursing school. I frantically scanned my brain, trying to think of how someone who was going to need Braille would be able to do that job. Then Sue piped up to say that her dream was to be an ER nurse. Her prior district told her she could do anything, including this. She had a degenerative disease that would eventually make her blind. I talked to my friends who are nurses. I talked to our career lady at the school. I researched, but there wasn't any way someone who couldn't see could be an ER nurse. I reconvened the IEP and had to explain this. I know both were in denial, but I was not happy that the prior district pumped up this idea. I mean, sure, there are lots she could still do, but that just wasn't one of them. Then another student came from the same district with the idea she could be a CSI investigator. She was also nearly blind. Having a third student coming in with the idea of being a fighter pilot would have made for a dark comedy trifecta. Story 11. Daughter of my mom's closest friend, when she floated the idea of owning a dog, I told her that since she has a dog allergy, she should not get any dogs. She proceeded to ignore the advice and get 3 dogs because they are cute. One of them loves to climb onto her bed every night. After 3 years of complaining about headache, fatigue, constant runny nose, and skin problems, I finally have a I hate to break it to you moment with her, and she finally believed me and decided to give the dogs to her maid. It was a longer story than that. She first tested it by banishing that dog from her bedroom, then eventually restricting them to just the ground floor, and her symptoms kept improving after each attempt. Her symptoms vanished within 3 months. Story 12. I'm a CPA/CFP. I sat down with a friend's parents right before 2020 about retirement. They had set up an IRA when they became a thing back in the 1970s and had been contributing to it regularly ever since. They didn't really understand the stuff, so they let their financial advisor handle the investments. But he had long since retired, so they wanted to sit down with me to go over their options. I looked at both of their accounts and almost had a heart attack when I saw that all of their money in both IRAs were in money market accounts. They had been contributing to a retirement account all their working lives, but weren't actually investing the money. It wasn't growing with the market. It was certainly an oversight by their financial advisor, but they're self-directed accounts. It was their responsibility to manage them. Most people don't understand this. People assume the person who opened the IRA is sitting there monitoring their account, but they're not. Not unless it's a managed account that you're specifically paying a fee for that management. They did have Social Security and equity in their home, but without the investment money they were counting on, they just didn't have enough for the retirement they were originally planning on. I advised them both to continue working until they reached full retirement to maximize Social Security and minimize deductions from what they had, convert their basement into an apartment for the rental income, and consider a reverse mortgage. In the end, they said okay, but it was an extremely tough conversation to have with them. Story 13. My fiance and I work together, just in different parts of the company and building per HR requirements, though our respective teams cross paths frequently. Nobody but HR and two other people know we're actually together, though, because we keep our personal and professional lives very separate. We don't even interact at work beyond carpooling there and back. This one lady on my team apparently developed a little crush on him, and he is clueless about when women are flirting with him. He's neurodivergent, so for a long time he just thought she was being friendly. I didn't even catch on to it at first because I really don't pay attention to what my coworkers do beyond work-related things. But I guess she kept finding reasons to hang out around him when our team's work was done and chatting him up. He eventually caught on and expressed his concern that she was coming on to him in private and was unsure of what to do, so I said I'd handle it. It was long before I heard her giggling to a group of other coworkers and saying stuff like, "Yeah, I think he's totally down. I'm going to go for it and ask him out after work." So I drifted over nonchalantly and was like, "Oh, an office romance. Who's the guy?" And of course, she told me it was my man. So I had to gently crush her dreams and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, girl, but he's engaged." To me. I felt kind of bad because she looked so mortified and crestfallen at the same time. Story 14. This was by accident, but one of the most uncomfortable moments I've ever experienced. I was dating a guy whose best friend, I'm going to call him Joe Blow, was engaged to a woman named Linda. One night, the guy I was dating was coming over to watch a movie and cook dinner and asked me if he could bring along Joe Blow, whose fiance was out of town. His actual real name was more of an unusual name, not a really common name, both first and last names. The evening went along fine enough until I learned the last name of the girl he was engaged to, and I knew her from years before when she married a guy named Joe Blow. Yep, same name. As they were leaving, I said to him, "It's so funny she's marrying you now when her ex-husband's name is also Joe Blow. It's funny, ha ha ha, I mean, it was shocking to me." He looked surprised, and I asked, "Oh, you didn't know that?" I was a little embarrassed. He said, "I didn't even know she had been married before." The guy had a PhD in psychology to boot. He looked to his friend as if he wanted some verification, and his friend said, yeah, man. She was married to Joe Blow for about 5 years. They've been divorced for about a year. It was a terribly awkward moment for all three of us, and I really wish I hadn't said anything, but what the heck? I know, right? And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 15. I have a 2-for-1. My former friend was a train wreck who could never stop sabotaging her own life. She was dating a guy with a record and got pregnant and decided to try to make it work. One day I told her we were having a cookout and the neighbor kids were over playing and she was casually like, "My boyfriend and I will stop over." The hell you will. I had to have a hard conversation with her about how her BF was never welcome at my house, in my presence, or near my children. Then she had the nerve to get upset with me. She said, "My family and I are a package deal." So I told her that I'm sorry she feels that way, but that's my line in the sand. Eventually, she realized she was being an absolute schmuck, apologized, and respected the boundaries, and we were still friends again for a while. This same friend, very pregnant and on state assistance for her health insurance, starts talking to me about how he is a libertarian and how great it is and blah, blah, blah. I let her go on for a while, but eventually had to cut her off and ask, "Aren't you on state insurance?" You could smell the gears just grinding away while she attempted to piece together what I subsequently told her about how her BF is trash and she is being a giant hypocrite. We aren't friends anymore. I also suspect she may be an actual energy vampire. Story 16. My ex-friend of 18 years was messy as hell at my 25th birthday brunch. She kept comparing the fallout of our individual relationships with our exes, like who was treated worse, whose ex was worse overall, etc., to my other guest, who she doesn't even know. At that point, I knew the conversation was going to go downhill, but I was ready to clap back. My ex-friend is obsessed with her ex, even though he treated her so badly and did her wrong in some of the craziest ways. Despite all that, she loved talking about him. He is her whole personality, basically. And out of nowhere, she brought up that he talks trash about me to her, and I said, that's funny because we don't even talk and he should know nothing about me that's discussable to you unless you've told him my business. But also, I'm sure he's been upset that I rejected him for the last 5 years and that's why he's with you, instead, still messaging me, trying to be with me. She and I have not spoken in 1 year and 5 months. Oops, maybe I said too much. Good riddance. Story 17. The day my little sister passed away from an accident, quoted at 33 years of age, I ran in the house for some reason thinking that my very limited medical training from the army could save her. I tried to run up the stairs to her bedroom as it was right at the top, only to be tackled by 2 police officers and got dragged back down. My mom and stepdad were so distraught that I had to call my dad and tell him his little girl was gone. They lost my other little sister when she was an infant, and so my sister was kind of their miracle baby. I never in my life seen or heard my old man break down even through some pretty strenuous crap, but that day I saw the toughest and kindest man I know break inside. At the funeral, I got the displeasure of telling my niece, 9 at the time. At the end, I was the last one in the room and my dad hugged me and we both cried harder than we ever had. That was December of 2016. 2 years ago yesterday, I held my mom as we took her off life support and felt and heard her last breath and heartbeat. I don't tell anyone, but usually 2 to 3 times a week, I have nightmares about not being able to save my sister. I tell my kids and fiance that it's my autoimmune disease that wakes me up, but really, it's my nightmares. I know I'll never be the same at all. Most days I force a smile and try to find happiness, but it's very elusive. Story 18. So when I was in rehab, we were broken down into classrooms every day to learn certain things about bad habits and do a curriculum of sorts. You had little books with activities and you had homework, that kind of stuff. But a lot of it was open discussion and you would just kind of explain how you got to where you were and all these things. The nice part about that was once a week, we had little feedback sessions for the entire group where it was encouraged that we explain what people could work on going forward in their recovery and stuff of that nature. Well, there was one man in his early 50s who lived a certain lifestyle and who you could basically tell was using his court-ordered rehab stay as just that and not actually caring about his recovery. He was a very smug and swarmy former lawyer, don't know what kind of law, and said all the right things you would want someone to say, but he was very easy to see through. But the problem is that he didn't see that. One day, it was time for his evaluation, and everyone, maybe 15 people, all had their few minutes to say something, and it got to me. I really want what is best for you and your family. I do have a lot of red flags with you and how you come off very insincerely here, though. You always talk about the old days, the fast cars, the young women, the good substances, and stuff like that because you pine for that stuff. You haven't learned anything and you certainly don't intend to get away from those habits, and the only person you have fooled is yourself for thinking you pulled one over on us. The only way I can describe your behavior is that you are a snake oil salesman, and you will continue to be so. I want what's best for you, but I have no faith that you do. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop, and he said nothing. Our counselor chimed in with something along the lines of, well, crap, I can't add anything to what Balrog has said here. He is 1,000% right. You've been here for 40 days, and you haven't changed anything about yourself. You could see the happiness fade from him, knowing his entire charade had no one fooled at all. Story 19. I once hired a line cook for my simple takeout deli that had way too good of a resume. He was leaving a trendy place in the city for my meat and cheese on bread establishment in the suburbs. He told me it was because he was moving and needed something close to home. I didn't dig into why he was willing to take a 40% pay cut. I was desperate for help. So dude shows up and crushes it day one. Day 2, couple of fumbles but strong lunch rush service. Day 3, he's a mess, tells me it won't happen again while being genuinely distraught that he couldn't hold down a 36-inch grill for 2 hours of medium-sized tickets. Day 4, this guy looks like he's rounding out a bender. He can barely stay on his feet and I catch him sleeping in the back multiple times. I pull him aside and ask what's up. Is he messed up on the job? Nope, terminal pancreatic cancer at age 34. Guy was skipping his chemo to get hired. Once he went back on his treatments, he was so completely wiped out he couldn't work all day without passing out from exhaustion. Then he showed me a picture of himself from 6 months prior, and it really set in that this man had weeks left to live. He was literally half his former self in size. A big, muscled-up, tattooed sous chef wearing his whites on the line of a hot place in Center City. But there he was in front of me, gaunt, so pale his tattoos lost their color. I told him to go home and get some rest and we would try again the next day. The next day came and it was torment for me. I had to let him go. I was a 3-person operation in year 1.5 of business and I was making zero money. Every single day was critical for me to retain new customers and to make rent and payroll. It was me, the full-time cook and high school kid that helped me close. This cook position wasn't something I could carry on my back. I absolutely needed it to produce for me or I would be out of business. We had a strong day, he had very few issues and was visibly feeling good about it. Then I followed him out to his car after his shift and laid it on him in private. It was intense. This was a guy that 6 months prior had every right to feel superior to me in my little deli operation. He immediately flashed anger, then acceptance, and then bargaining began. That's when I said something I still regret. I looked him right in the eye and said, "Don't beg me, man." I guess I wanted to end the conversation and came in hot on that one because I watched the fight disappear from his face. Just pure disappointment at his state of affairs. He was begging and for a job beneath his talents. He shook my hand and left. I apologized and he didn't respond. I Googled his name a few months later just to see what may have happened. Well, it happened. His obituary was published about 6 weeks after his last day. I was his last employer and had fired him for suffering on the job. I'm out of business now. I have lots of lessons learned from my time hiring and managing and firing people. But that guy will probably always stick with me as a low point in letting capitalism dictate my life. He deserved better than what we as a society gave to him as just a cook. He never had good insurance, never had enough paid time off to get real treatment. In the end, he didn't have the dignity of being with his family and not worrying about money for his final days. People shouldn't find out their life is over from some schmuck paying them $16 an hour to make sandwiches. Story 20. My ex-wife kept saying she had this amazing pit bull divorce attorney, how this woman was going to take me to the cleaners, etc., etc. I had a feeling she was full of it, so I made an appointment with that attorney. By going for a consultation, I conflicted her out and my ex couldn't use her. As our divorce progressed, my ex kept talking a huge game but didn't show up for anything. She ended up defaulting on divorce. When she found out, she went goofy and was yelling at me how she was getting this divorce attorney on phone, etc. I smiled and said, when you do, remind her of my consultation with her. I explained you don't have an attorney, never did, and it is what it is. I said you can't play a bluff card that doesn't exist. Made me feel amazing, and she still bent out over it. Story 21. Back when I was in the military working overnights on a watch floor, we had a guy who was way into doomsday prepping, had elaborate plans, had tons of supplies and equipment, go bags, and so on. He would talk about it constantly and really believe that there was going to be a nuclear war and people like him would be left to guide the future of humanity. One day, he asked me what my nuclear survival plan was, and I told him that I was just planning on being gone. He seemed really confused by this, and I had to point out to him that an ICBM would only take 20 to 30 minutes to reach its target, and given where we worked and lived nearby, was likely a top priority target we were all going to pass away, likely before we even really knew what was happening, despite how much doomsday prepping anyone did. He was quiet for several days after that. Story 22. My best buddy's girlfriend of 4 years took me for lunch and got up to go to the bathroom, telling me she had something to discuss. I had a hunch, so I started the voice recorder app on my phone, legal in my country. She sat back down and for about 90 minutes told me a long, winding story of how she cheated on him with a guy they both knew. She lived with him and he was about to give her equity in his gorgeous, luxurious apartment. I'd warned my buddy that she had feelings for this other guy twice before and he had squared it away over the years. I called him from the street to tell him, and again he thought I must be exaggerating. I spared him the details at that point. I told him about the recording, and of course he wanted me to share it. I told him that it would be difficult to hear the recording alone and respond appropriately given they lived together. So the next day, we walked around the city just listening to it and pausing it to discuss stuff and making plans for how he could navigate the confrontation and manage kicking her out of the house. It was emotionally arduous work, but worth it. He says the whole thing went heaps better with him knowing the unvarnished truth and having the space to go through it and get a grip on the impact of it without her being able to see, and I agree. He was able to end it quicker and cleaner that way. Story 23. Received an Uber Eats order that was just one cheesy roll-up from Taco Bell. The pay was about $20. Very suspicious, but I figured at some point they would ask for a favor, so I decided to at least see what they wanted. Without fail, as soon as I confirmed I picked up the order, I got a text message. Usually, customers will ask you to stop by a gas station and pick up stuff, but this one was a little different. This woman wanted me to basically go to her house to see if her husband was alone. She was off on a business trip and had suspected him of cheating. She definitely overshared about the situation, but I didn't mind letting her vent, especially since I had to break the news to her that there were two vehicles in front of her house, her husband's truck and apparently her best friend's SUV. She had initially asked her friend to do it and didn't get a response. I guess paranoia set in, and she feared for the worst, so she got the idea of having a delivery driver go there. I wanted to be a private investigator when I was a kid, so she definitely got the right one. I got to keep the cheesy roll-up, too. Story 24. The girl I was falling for went on a planned 2-week trip to Europe with her mom. We'd been together maybe 6 weeks, and I was just out of a long live-in relationship. So yeah, fully rebounding and messed up sideways. I bought her a special moleskin journal and took her to dinner the night before she left and then somehow missed her. Counting days, pining, waiting to hear after her scheduled return, nada. I break down and call her, nothing. Next day, nothing. So I go full John Favreau and swingers for days. Turns out they extended the trip. This was 2000 before full-on connectivity, so I had no clue, but landlines and physical answering machines were very much a thing, and she had all the clues she needed when she got home and pressed play. She called me right away on my old Nokia brick. I was in the car with 3 friends going upstate to ski for the weekend. I'm like, hey, can't wait to see you. Let's grab dinner Monday after work. My friends are all listening. She goes, we could totally be friends, but for me, romantically, this has definitely run its course. And I'm so blindsided and now hot and flushed, I mumbled something like, well, hey, thanks, but I'm pretty set up with friends these days, so, yeah, cool, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. Story 25. Mine was 2 in one night. First, the sheriff came to tell me that my friend was terminated. I was watching her kids at the time. It's a long story, but I was crushed. Her husband had arrived home and she still wasn't home, so I stayed until we could figure out what happened to her. Her husband was inconsolable. I didn't know what to do with the kids, though, because he was so devastated that he couldn't even function. The sheriff offered to stay to make sure everyone was okay until we could figure it out. I called my friend's sister to ask if she could come get the kids. She answered the phone, and this is at 2 in the morning, so she knew something was wrong. She said, hello? And I had to break it to her that her sister was terminated. The cry from the other end of the phone as she said, not my sister, haunts me to this day. It was a horrible night, and I relive it in my dreams to this day. I never want to do that again. In my job, I was asked to call a family member to let them know their loved one passed, and I nearly had a mental breakdown. I was never asked to do that again. Story 26. I was the target of the hate to break it to you. When I was a teen, I was a regular at hospitals for people with no physical illnesses, let's put it that way. Anyway, there were cliques, and my clique included 2 very depressed teenage girls. I guess I'll use numbers, so 1 and 2, and another girl 3, who was a friend of 1 and 2 but didn't really talk to me. They were all roommates if I remember correctly. 1 I considered a friend. She'd always hang out with me during the breaks from what passed for a school and ask for my advice. We both liked similar music and liked art. I was a dilettante, but she had serious professional talent. Anyway, we would talk a lot and she was nice. She was my friend. 2 was legitimately her best friend. 2 was even more depressed than 1. She dressed kind of like Reaper from Overwatch, if that's not too bad an example, with a hoodie as a cloak and big leather boots. She was extremely intelligent and well-read, but a big misanthrope. She would always be on her MP3 player and earphones, even during conversations sometimes. 3 was quiet and shy, and I didn't know her a lot. A lot of boys from other cliques wanted her, pale as snow, blue eyes, silken hair, etc., but she was never interested. Anyway, one evening before the holidays, yes, some people get holiday break according to if they think you're fit for it, I was sitting with 2 in the designated smoking place and talking about life. When I said that I just found the band Radiohead, she said Paranoid Android was one of her favorite songs and that I should listen to it. She says she's reading the first Hitchhiker's Guide, and I say I always wanted to read it. Anyway, I don't remember a lot of the rest except she told me I should learn to stop caring about other people. Curfew hit, and we went to sleep. The following day after we did what passes for school activities, Tu came to me and handed me a hardcover Hitchhiker's Guide. I thank her and ask if she wants it back after the holidays, and she simply shakes her head and goes. We went for the holidays, had a regular Friday, but on Saturday I couldn't sleep much, so I stayed up until like 4 thinking of stuff. Sunday, I wake up, shower, eat, etc., commute back to the hospital, enter the ward, and everyone's talking frantically with each other. I find my clickmates, except two, and they see me and stop their conversation. I ask how they're doing, and they say they're fine, but their voice sounds somewhat weird. I ask them if two arrived yet from the holiday, and one looks at me and goes, "She ended herself." I say, "Yeah, that's not funny. Did she arrive yet?" It is at that point where one lets out a scream and starts hurting me. I run away. I go to ask people where two is, and they all start crying when I do, if they weren't crying already. One person tells me, basically, after breakfast, the entire team put everyone in the mess hall, and the head doctor basically informed that on Saturday at 3 a.m., she spread out all the paintings on her bed and jumped off. I came in late, so I missed that mess hall event. It is at this point that I get really paranoid, comes with the job, sadly. Everyone is lying to me, and it's a conspiracy. Only when I get the head doctor alone and tell him about this conspiracy that it starts to sink in when he confirms it. I went back to the lodge area where three and some psychology students were sitting and crying their eyes out. Two left some letters, but they were coded in some sort of cipher and they can't figure it out. Three confesses to having been deeply in love with two this entire time. I don't feel well at all, so I go to the nurse and ask for a proper sedative, and that's how that day ends. I was thinking about it a lot, and I missed two indications that this was going to happen. The lyrics at the end of Paranoid Android, which I only listened to long after that happened. The book, man, do I feel guilty about not recognizing that behavior. To this day. It didn't really get much better after that. A few months later, I had to be the one to tell one that the boy she was crushing on like crazy was undercover dating 4 girls at the same time. Anyway, yeah, that's the worst moment of that sort. I still miss 2 and 1 sometimes. However, I should say that unlike two's predicament, life truly can get better over time. It just takes years of hard work to this day. You really can make changes in your quality of life. Please remember that if you're dealing with disorders or with grief, it's always darkest before dawn. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.